So, this is a story all about how your luck got flipped, turned upside down. So, if you'd like to take a minute, just sit right there. We'll tell you how to make better luck in Dominion. It doesn't really work, does it? Doesn't really work. Welcome to Making Luck, a Dominion podcast. I'm Wandering Winder. Not joining me this week is anybody else because, well, let's get into that a little bit. So it's been quite a while since the lad podcast. It's a nice lad of a podcast, yeah. Since the last podcast, and it's been a while since the last podcast, and we've part of that is because we've been busy, mostly with work, but with some other stuff going on. And so that's slowed us down in getting some stuff produced. Part of it's just because it hasn't been the highest priority for us. Part of it's because we haven't been able to find times for more than one of us to record. And then part of it's because Adam's gotten sick. So we had a plan for, actually, by the time this is out, probably last week, we had an episode planned. And that should hopefully be coming out relatively soon, trademark. But for now, you get just me because, it has been long enough and I had a topic. So great. Uh, also going forward, we should note that we are going to try to do podcasts somewhat more regularly than like this month off or whatever it's been. But there's a good chance it won't be weekly like it was before, and the lineup may be a bit more varied. We might not have the same two co-hosts every episode. It could be some solo episodes, some different mix and match going on. We'll see how it goes, but we will try to get it, more often than it has been recently, although weekly is maybe not an ideal which we can achieve at the moment. But enough about that. Let's get into the actual content here, starting with going over the kingdom from last episode. So if you don't remember, the kingdom was tax, expedition, courtyard, moat, cutpurse, quarry, treasure map, recruiter, scholar, bank, expand, and forge. Once more for our audio only listeners, that's courtyard, moat, cutpurse, quarry, treasure map, recruiter, scholar, bank, expand, forge, with the events, tax, and expedition. So, haven't really had much chance to play games with this kingdom either. I have played a few games, but unfortunately they were all bot games. What seemed to work out best for me was mostly to get an early recruiter, thin down a bit, and get and expand a second recruiter, and then move to getting treasure maps. Probably get about 2 sets of treasure maps, and then just start buying and expanding into provinces, maybe with a second expand somewhere around the lines of that. Usually we're getting a quarry. I was getting a quarry at some point pretty early to help afford the recruiters in the expand or expands. Also, it's fine food for the recruiter later. I wasn't really getting much in terms of draw. It was just hard to find the time to do that. But making pretty reasonable use out of expedition where possible. You wanted to get, expedition fairly often to help you get your recruiters, help you play them more often, help you get your stuff together, help you hit your price points. Not getting too many silvers, maybe one, maybe two, I think at most. But other than that, like usually you're wanting to buy expedition. Sometimes they didn't get any silvers. I just bought expedition. That just depends on how the money works out, and tax is a big part of that. I don't really know how things would go so much if I were playing against a human opponent with tax, because the bot I don't think plays around tax much, if at all. Um, yeah, it slows you down a bit here. Anyway, this whole strategy with the treasure maps and the expands and recruiting into them, I think seems like it's probably at least about the best thing. Maybe some variation is a little bit better. You only get one expand, you only get one set of treasure maps, and you try to buy stuff a little more. Or maybe you go a little bit heavier. Maybe you should be getting a scholar or two. Yeah, I'm not totally sure on that. I do think because of how tax stuff plays out, it is going to play fairly differently every time. And like I say, I didn't have a ton of time to play around it. If you guys have other ideas, feel free to let us know. Um, but let's move off of this kingdom from last time and go to a comment that we got in feedback from last time in our Discord. And this is a comment from Bobby DJ18. It was a really good feedback. And I'm going to read a slightly abbreviated version of it here. But he says that he feels like what is interesting about tax is the setup and how that impacts the strategy, especially right at the start of the game. He didn't feel like we really addressed that much, that we took a long time to get to it and then we didn't address it much. And I think he's totally right. Well, interesting is kind of subjective, but it often is the most interesting thing. And I think we kind of dismissed it a little bit because, right, it's not a decision to have the setup, to have a debt token on everything. It's not a decision you make. But it does impact the decisions you do make. And we didn't talk about that much. And we mentioned, like, you might have some first player disadvantage and something about an extra debt and various things. But we didn't really go into detail about how you play around it or not. Yeah, and so he also points out an example of what he's talking about there. He says, the difference isn't just that player one sometimes has a debt after the first shuffle. Like, if I'm player one and then I buy Ironmonger on turn one, player two can buy Ironmonger on turn one and Silver on turn two, and I just have to repay debt. So, should I skip Ironmonger turn one if I have four in a one card kingdom with just Ironmonger and tax? Yeah, so this is actually really interesting, and we didn't talk about it that much. I actually think a one card kingdom is a little bit of a disservice here because part of part of the solution in most real kingdoms is that you can only tax one thing, and so taxing a thing as your two cost option is less appealing in real kingdoms than it is in this virtual one card kingdom. But let's walk through the one card kingdom and talk about different things that you should think about. So, okay, first of all, yes, if you open Ironmonger on turn one, if you have a 4-3, then if your opponent has a 4-3, they can go Ironmonger. Then you're going to have two on turn two, and you can and should buy a tax. You know that your opponent is going to have three. I guess you're not 100% sure that they're going to have three. They could have slow rolled a five and just bought Ironmonger with their five, but only showed you four coppers. But it's at least very likely that they're going to have a three. And so on three, they're going to want to buy silver. So on your turn two, if you opened Ironmonger and you have a debt, and then they open Ironmonger, then you should pay the debt and you should tax silver. And then they either have the choice of buying a silver, at which point they have Ironmonger and silver and three debt going into the shuffle, whereas you have Ironmonger and no debt going into the shuffle, right? And there's no debt on Ironmonger and there's no debt on silver, and all the rest of the debt is there, and you have to figure out how good or bad that option is for you. But also they obviously don't have to buy the silver, and if they think that it's not advantageous for them to take the silver with the three debt, then that means that they're probably going to come back and tax as well. And the most obvious thing for them to tax at that point is probably the Ironmongers, because you're going to have first shot at them, and it makes it so you don't have much of anything to buy. So now there's two debt on the Ironmongers, three debt on the silvers, and you each have an Ironmonger and no debt going into the shuffle. And you're first player, and there's a bunch of debt on stuff. You probably aren't going to want to buy an Ironmonger for two debt. Maybe you can, maybe you should, I don't know. You're probably not going to want to buy a silver with three debt. Again, maybe you can, maybe you should, I don't know. If you decide to do neither of those things, unless you're very lucky and hit six, which happens a small percentage of the time, then you're going to end up taxing something, and then they're going to end up taxing something, and you just get into basically tax nightmare, where everything is just mega taxed and nobody wants to buy anything because tax is everywhere. You can think about buying a copper at some point because you want to hit 6, but at some point, if golds get taxed too much, then really nothing is ever worth buying, and you get into a stalemate. And so you get into a tax stalemate. However, that doesn't really come up in practice, and the biggest reason for that is, well, in this hypothetical scenario, where you've taxed the silver, if there's any 3 or 2 cost for them to get, then they just get that instead of silver, right? If there's anything reasonable worth getting at all, then they're just going to get that instead of silver. And if there's any reasonable 4 cost, even if there wasn't a 2 or a 3, then even if they tax the ironmongers, you can get a different 4, right? So that ends up not coming up that much. There's also events. If there's a different event to get, that's worth buying instead of just taxing everything to oblivion, or project, or anything like that. So that's one reason why it doesn't happen. The other reason why it doesn't happen is probably for at least one of you, opening Ironmonger is not the right play. So here's the other thing. So if you open Ironmonger and take the debt, they're going to have 4-3. They know that you're likely to tax something on your second turn because they know you're going to have 2 money to spend. They could get silver, pay the debt. You tax the silver anyway because you know they have 3. And then after you've taxed silver anyway, then they will, they can buy silver anyway as well. At which point they have 2 silvers and 2 debt, and you have an ironmonger. And I think that's probably advantageous to them. I'm not 100% sure. But the other thing is, there's a couple of other things, but you probably shouldn't open Ironmonger on turn 1 either because you have to take the debt with it. And, well, so the other thing about this to note is that you don't know that they're going to have a 4-3, right? If you open Ironmonger and they have a 3-4, they're going to open silver and you're going to pay the debt and then you're going to tax the silver. And then they're going to pay off their debt and they can either buy silver and have 2 debt anyway, or, have 2 silvers and a debt, same as we just talked about, or 2 silvers and 2 debt. Or, there's lots of options there too, but right, you don't know that they could have 3-4, they could have 2-5, they could have 5-2. The last thing is you should probably open silver, right? You open silver, you pay the debt. Your opponent has a 4-3. They can either open Ironmonger and then you got a silver on turn 2, so you have 2 silvers and no debt. They have an Ironmonger and they have to tax something. You're ahead. 2 silvers is better than 1 Ironmonger on this board. So you're ahead if you do that. Otherwise, they can just follow you into silver on their 4-3, at which point you have identical decks and you have first player, there's still the debt on the Ironmonger pile. Or if they have a 3-4 and you open silver on 4-3 and get silver, and they have a 3-4, they can go silver Ironmonger and they have silver Ironmonger and a debt. And this is really the bigger difference where turn player 1 gets to be disadvantaged, I think, more often than having an extra debt. It's more often this, where it's not that you have an extra debt compared to them, it's that you have silver, they have silver and a 4 cost, and they have an extra debt. Now with Ironmonger, I don't know that the debt is actually worth taking the Ironmonger. Like, especially on turns 3 and 4 with your starting decks, I think Ironmonger is a better card than silver, but not enough better to take a debt for, basically. So I think you should open silver, and your opponent should follow you with silver. But there's more considerations here too, right? If there's a good 2 cost on board, then you can open Ironmonger, pay the debt, and then get the 2 cost. And then your opponent might be able to follow you into Ironmonger and the 2 cost, and you have the extra debt, right? You can open with the 2 cost if you have a 3-4. You can basically, just like normal, you want to think about not only this turn, but also your next turn and figure out, okay, if I'm going to take this debt, how is that going to affect what I can buy next turn? And once it gets more complicated, you also want to think about okay, what can your opponent do on this turn or the next turn? And usually you know exactly, not on turn one, which is really important as player one, because you shouldn't play around what they might be able to follow you exactly and not have to pay the debt as player one, because they might have a different split. In fact, they probably do have a different split, right? There's only a 37.5% chance that they have the same split as you. I no, that's not even the right percentage. There's a 5/12 chance that they have the same split as you. Um, so you shouldn't really play around them having the same split as you. On turn one, you shouldn't really play around that. On turn two, you're likely to know exactly what they have because it's unlikely that they've sandbagged any of their money, because they're going to want to spend it all either on between the cards they buy and the debt that they're going to pay off. Usually, not always, but usually, they're not going to have sandbagged. So you usually know what they have by turn two, and you can keep that in mind. But the biggest thing is just like, think about, okay, is buying this card with this debt more valuable than buying a slightly worse card but having less debt, right? And so in the case of the Ironmonger Silver thing, Ironmonger is usually not enough better than Silver to be worth a debt on turns one and two. It's not that much better for your deck, because the point of both of them is just to be more or less econ. Even the draw bits of Ironmonger is mostly econ at that point. It does get you back to your shuffle a little bit faster than Silver, but that's kind of a negligible part of the value. Economically, Ironmonger and Silver are pretty similar given your starting deck, and yeah, just a debt is kind of significant at that point in the game. So usually you shouldn't be wanting to do that with this particular set of cards. Now, with other cards, that might not be true. Let's say you wanted to open a remake, then it becomes more of an issue. But let's say you were wanting to open a remake and probably isn't a one card board anymore. But you could think, well, should I open remake on 4/3 because I'm going to have to take this debt, and my opponent, when they have their 4, isn't going to. But this is the part where you not knowing what their split is really important, because if you open remake on turn one and take the debt, if they don't have 4 on turn one, then they're going to buy something else. And then on turn two, you can tax the remakes. If they want to get a remake, they end up taking more debt than you, right? So it's all a complex thing, but the long and short of it is, think about the debt that you're going to have to take. Think about what that's going to mean for what you can do over the course of this full shuffle. Think about, first of all, if you get stuck with 2, there's at least tax to buy. So even in that tax, where everything got taxed out, the everything got taxed, and you got to do a tax stalemate. That's not actually like a disadvantage for you. It's just much less advantageous than normal because it's just totally even. It's a stalemate is even, right? So long story short, think about what you're going to have. Think about what you're going to have next turn. Try to maximize over the course of this shuffle what you're going to be able to do. And as a slight thing, keep in mind that you can tax stuff. And then on turn two, keep in mind that you probably know exactly how much money your opponent has, and you can play around that a little bit if there's close options from your end. But this is a lot of little tactical thinking, and just thinking about, okay, this turn and then next turn, and thinking a couple of steps ahead, which actually brings us to what I want to cover for the main topic today, which is these little kinds of tactical decisions, optimizations, short-term strategizing, to where, right, a lot of the times when I talk about, for instance, a money density deck, we talk about the average money that you make on a turn, and it's just the average and the average and the average. But there's a pretty significant variance a lot. And if you really want to play as best as you possibly can this game of Dominion, you want to usually take advantage of that level of variance as much as you can. So in money density decks, that's sometimes with the amount of money that you're going to be able to make. It's sometimes with the draw you're going to have the next turn, mitigating terminal collisions, some fancy things you can do there. If you're trying to draw more, sometimes it's seeding your next hand. In the end game, There's obviously a lot. We've had a lot of coverage of this endgame stuff, but these kinds of short-term decisions, which aren't necessarily just predicated on what the average case is, come up a lot, and they're actually really important. And actually, we've seen that a lot in several of the recent kingdoms that we've seen, right? So, um, thinking about what your next turn and or sometimes what your next couple turns is going to be is really important. And in the recent kingdoms, let's think of some of the stuff, right? There was a kingdom a while back which there was a crop rotation in. And it's important to know that if you buy crop rotation on turn 3, when you have exactly 6 having opened silver equivalent, if you have exactly 6 on turn 3, then if you buy crop rotation then, you're going to guarantee that you hit 5 on turn 4. And so if what you really want is a 5 cost, then buying crop rotation on turn 3 gets you that 5 cost and gets you the crop rotation. So that can be really good. Similarly, if you want a 6, knowing that if you hit 5 on turn 3, buying Den of Sin is going to guarantee that you get 6 on turn 4, right? Again, assuming that you open silver equivalent. If you open spices on turn 3, that all but guarantees that you get another 5 on turn 4. Maybe spices isn't the card that you need the most, but spices might be better than what you would otherwise have been getting on turn 4, especially when you're pretty likely to have an extra coffers left around still, right? You're fairly likely to hit 4 on turn 4. You spend 1 coffers, you have a spices plus a coffers. A coffers is pretty good, right? We had a kingdom, the cultist kingdom, right, where you could consider opening silver and then ghost town, and that guarantees that you hit 5 on either turn 3 or turn 4. So that seems pretty good. Thinking through that to realize that you're going to see all 11 of your cards on turns 3 and 4, and you have 9 money in your deck, so you're definitely going to hit 5. That's a nice thing to be able to do. On the other hand, if you think about it more, you know that opening silver, and then if you don't hit 5 on turn 3, getting a ghost town also guarantees you hitting 5 on turns 3 or 4, and it gives you some chance to hit 5 twice on turns 3 and 4, because if you do hit 5 on turn 3, you might hit 5 again on turn 4. It's not super likely, but it can happen. There's expedition even in last week's kingdom, right? If you open silver, maybe not with the tax so much, but right in a different kingdom with expedition, you open silver, then if you don't hit 5 on turn 3, then expedition will guarantee that you hit 5 on turn 4. If you hit exactly 3 money on turn 3, then expedition is going to mean that you're going to hit the rest of the money in your deck, right? Because you have 12 cards in your deck, and you've seen 5 of them on turn 3, you're going to see the rest on turn 4. So if you saw 3 money on turn 3, the rest of your money in your deck on turn 4 is 8. So you hit 8 on turn 4 if you hit 3 on turn 3. If you hit 4 on turn 3, you get it 7 on turn 4, right? So this is a way that you are likely to be able to spike your inheritance quickly, right? If you hit 5 on turn 3, you can expedition to hit 6 on turn 4, right? So basically, you're all but guaranteed to hit 6 on turns 3 and 4 by opening silver on an expedition board. If you just want to hit 5, then turn 1 you might open expedition, right? Especially if you have a 3-4, you're very likely to get to 5 on turn 2 then, right? So all of these little tactical things is very short-term. Events are a big thing for it, but it also comes into play with non-events. There's nights, there's all kinds of stuff, and I'm not going to go into all of it right now because this is like 55 episodes worth of content on these little optimizations on the right now stuff, where getting the short-term advantage lets you do something better now, which actually translates into a long-term advantage, right? Right? Silver is a good card. Silver will help your deck, but not taking the silver for just something temporary might appear at first glance to be a long-term disadvantage compared to the silver, because you don't have the silver every subsequent turn for the rest of the game. But because you bought something better now, right, because you got your expedition or whatever, you get something better immediately, And so instead of having the silver and this worse thing, you have the one better thing. And in a lot of cases, the one better thing is enough, is good enough to be, worth it. Having a good turn now snowballs into you having more good turns later, basically, right? So doing something to maximize your immediate impact, uh, again, usually on shuffles, but sometimes even just turn to turn, especially with like coffers and villagers where it's not the same across a shuffle, is definitely something you should be looking at doing. And I want to look into this a bit more with some more concrete examples, talking about the not a card, but I'm going to call it a card because it's physically still a card, even if it's not a card by the rules of the game card, Citygate, which is, yeah, a project. So Citygate is a 3-cost project from the Renaissance expansion. That's the Renaissance expansion, if I'm not talking pretentiously. It says, at the start of your turn, +1 card, then put a card from your hand onto your deck. So let's start by talking about this with openings where things can get very, very tactical, like we've just been describing, right? If we open 3-4, we can buy Citygate on turn 1. Then on turn 2, we're going to have our 4 coppers and an estate. We're going to trigger a shuffle because there's 5 cards in our discard pile, no cards in our draw deck. We're going to trigger a shuffle. We're going to draw 1 of 5 cards. There's 3 coppers and 2 estates, so that gives us a 60% chance to hit 5 on turn 2, opening Citygate on turn 1. If we're looking for a 5, then great. There's a 60% chance that we hit it, and then we're shuffling again on turn 3, right? So you shuffle again on turn 3, and you have like a 1 in 6 chance of playing 1 in 6 of the 60%, so that's 10% overall to play a 5 on turn 3. But even if you don't play the 5 on turn 3, the other 50%, right? The other 5/6 of the 60%, which is 50% overall, you're going to be able to play it on turn 4. So yeah, that's a reasonable thing to think about. Certainly there's other good things on a lot of boards that you might want to do and might be better and you might want to do more. But that is definitely something that you can think about opening on turn 1. If you miss, right, there's a 40% chance you don't get 5 on turn 2. If you miss, then you're going to have your 4 coppers and 2 estates, right? Then you can stick a copper on top. You can buy a silver. And then you have a 11 card deck, which has a silver, 7 coppers, and 3 estates. You're going to see, because of Citygate, you're going to see all 11 cards over the next 2 turns. And so you can guarantee that you hit at least 5 on turns 3 or 4. And so if that's something you want to do, you can guarantee that you get a 5 before you shuffle at the end of turn 4 by opening Citygate on turn 1, right? Also, all of these times where I'm talking about silver, it doesn't have to be a silver. There's lots of times where it's something else is better, right? I'm talking about silver because it's always available, but right, in an actual game, you should think about whatever options are actually on the board and think about which one of those is best and not just be like silver, 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 right? But I'm just going through silver because I'm not going to randomly talk about the one, small percentage of the time where this other specific card is on the board. Anyway, if what you want to hit is 6, Citygate, silver, and again, you're going to have this turns 3 and 4. You have 9 money in your deck, a silver, 7 coppers, and 3 estates. You have a 50-50 chance, I think, if I've calculated it right, although that's kind of off the top of my head. But it's a pretty good chance of hitting 6, right? It's better than if you'd open silver, because silvers miss a shuffle sometimes, but not with Citygate, right? So either you're going to look at 6 cards at the start of your turn 3, right? And as long as you don't have exactly 5 coppers in an estate, then you can hit 6, right? If you have exactly 5 coppers in an estate on turn 3 with the 6 cards you see from Citygate, you can't hit 6. Maybe 50-50 is wrong. Yeah, I think 50-50 is wrong. Anyway, In that case, you can't hit six. I think it's better than 50% chance to hit six because that is a likely scenario, five coppers in an estate, but it's not like, more likely than all the other scenarios combined, right? So, yeah, anything else, if you hit four on turn three, then you can stick a copper back and you're going to have three this turn and you can make sure you hit six the next turn. If you hit three on turn three, you can stick anything back and hit six the next turn. If you hit, and then you can't hit less than three and six cards. And then if you hit obviously more than five on turn three, then you have six. So you hit six on turn three. And if you hit, the only other thing left is, right, five money from a silver, three coppers, and two estates. And then you can stick the silver back. You hit three, and you're going to hit six on turn four. So, right, knowing exactly what the rest of your deck is, right, there's six cards there, but on turn four, you're going to have City Gate again. You're going to see all six of them. You can put probably an estate back and make it miss the shuffle. But basically, the point is you can manipulate your turn by turn to get exactly what you want with a pretty high probability, right? You can also go silver into City Gate if that's what you really want. And then it more or less works out the same as what we just talked about as the fail case from the 3-4. Um, City Gate on with 4 money on turn 1 looks very similar to that. Um, yeah, so the money smoothing effect to hit exactly the price points you want is very important in a lot of cases. And I say smoothing, but actually it's usually more increasing the variance than decreasing it. And Citygate helps you do this a lot because you got to kind of manipulate your whole shuffle. There's other cards that let you do it to a lesser extent where you're just kind of saving one card, Haven or Save or Courtyard kind of things. Yeah, this smoothing effect is pretty important in a lot of cases here because, fairly often there's a really good six or sometimes there's a really good five and you want to hit four or you want to make that estate miss the shuffle a lot. But there's a lot of things going on there. And Citygate helps a lot with that. And just the very tactical nature of getting exactly what you want when you want it is the big advantage to Citygate. It helps you manipulate your shuffles and take better advantage of the variance. Let's talk a little bit more about Citygate in a way that starts to move a little bit off this concept, although some version of this concept is still definitely there throughout the game. But there's other things that Citygate does, and since I've talked about Citygate this episode, I want to give a little bit of detail about Citygate more generally, since this is going to be the Citygate episode. People complain about Citygate a lot, saying it doesn't do anything once you're drawing cards. And there's some truth to that, right? If you have a couple cantrips in your hand, you Citygate at the start of your turn, you put something back, you're going to play all your cantrips, it didn't matter what you put back, right? So in that case, Citygate didn't really help you very much. But even in those decks where you're drawing quite a bit, Citygate helps a little bit fairly often, right? One of the big things is a lot of times in those decks you need to find a village pretty early, and Citygate effectively gives you 6 cards to be able to look for that village as opposed to your 5-card starting hand, and that's not a totally trivial impact in terms of helping out your well, basically making you less likely to dud. It's a real impact. It's not the hugest impact ever, right? It may not be worth it just for that. Like in the mid game, it might be that buying a different card is better than buying the Citygate. But especially if it's something that you're thinking about opening because of what we've just talked about with the openings, it is some real value that it will provide you later in the game still. Citygate can be a downside if you have 5 or fewer cards in your deck, because you still try to draw a card, you can't draw a card because there's no card there, and you have to stick a card back on top of your deck, at which point that's probably a downside. You've basically discarded a card, although it's gone onto your deck instead. Sometimes that's an upside, but usually it's a downside. It's pretty rare that you have a deck that small for very long, though, but that's something. And then there's also games where you don't have any cards that draw, or you have very few cards that draw. Citygate is helpful here, right? We just talked about this whole thing with the opening about how you're managing your money to where you hit good amounts every turn. In a game where you're not drawing like at all, then hitting your price points more optimally is a really big value, right? If say the fives on the board aren't very good, then hitting 6 and 4 a lot is something you can do with Citygate to get your golds and your good fours. Or if the five is really good, then hitting exactly five a lot and not wasting money on six, hitting six is something you can do. Hit exactly eight instead of hitting 9 or 10, and you can save some money for later, right? You smooth out the variance in a way that's very helpful. You lose that if you're drawing, of course, because you need to draw to take advantage of your cards. Although if you're only drawing a little bit, then sometimes you can, choose to either stick the cantrip on top of your deck or not. Like say you just have a couple peddlers or something, or peddler equivalents. You can choose to just stick those back on top or not. And that can be helpful as well. And then also there's, and the other thing to note about that, of course, is almost every game starts and you're not drawing. So, right, at the beginning, you can think about Citygate. And again, in all of these cases, it's not just, oh, Citygate's good, you should get it every time, right? You have to look at what else is available, right? Other stuff is also good, and Citygate is certainly not the most premium thing. So in a lot of cases, you want to go with the other thing instead. But let's talk about some synergies that Citygate has. There's a few good ones. So Piazza has the particular thing that it really cares about what card is on top of your deck at the start of your turn. And so Citygate allows your Piazza to hit an action as long as there's an action in the top 6 cards of your deck. On top of that, if there's more than one, it can hit the one that you would prefer to hit, right? So usually you would rather hit some plus card, plus action card earlier in the turn and not a payload card. I mean, you take hitting the payload card, but right, you'd rather hit the village early on so that you make sure you have enough actions, and you can always play the payload card at the end. So that little bit of hitting a good card is also some value that it gets you with Piazza, but it really ups the Piazza value, right? Vassal is very similar, right? You can make sure that your vassal hits, or skips the thing that you want it to skip. Like if you want to edge case, you can use it to have vassal enable tunnel. Hurrah! But yeah, mostly it's going to be the vassal is hitting an action that you want to hit. So that's a nice thing that it can do. And lets the vassal be played earlier in the turn, gets you a little bit of better deck control out of that. Make sure that your vassal hits is the big thing. Mystic is kind of similar, right? Mystic with Citygate, you know exactly the card that's on top of your deck. You can Mystic for it. Boom, you're good to go. Okay, not as good, but still, it's something. There's Chariot Race. You can stick the most expensive card in your 6 cards on top of your deck. Make your Chariot Race more likely to win. That's kind of narrow, but not nothing. Yeah, then there's some. If you squint, it's kind of there things. Probably you're not going to go for Citygate for these, but I mean there's Citadel, so you're more likely to play the action that you actually want doubled. There's crop rotation. You're more likely to be able to have a green card in hand, although I think the bigger deal for crop rotation is actually just opening Citygate helps you hit 6 faster. There's Transmogrify, makes you slightly better to have the card you want to T-Mog in your opening hand. Ratcatcher, similar but trashing. Cathedral, similar but trashing. Menagerie helps remove duplicates, I guess. There's some thin stuff like Scrying Pool, Advisor, Border Guard, Jack, where like you can clear off a bad card and skip it with one of those, but we're getting pretty thin there. And then one that's hard to make work but is good if you can is Zombie Mason. It's hard to make work because usually you'd want to play more actions after that, and for that you usually need a village, and most villages draw. But if you have a non-drawing village, or you have villagers, or some way to have extra actions at the start of a turn, you can set up something to Zombie Mason by sticking it on top of your deck. So yeah, all of those things are real, I guess. I guess the tan and orange cards, you're more likely to find them on turn 3 if you get a city gate on turn 2, but that's quite narrow. I wouldn't really vote for that as being much of anything in favor of city. I mean, it's not actual nothing, but man, that's so narrow. It's probably not going to be worth it. The long and short of it is, like, most of these synergies, apart from the first few, which are actually good, are really not like worth building around most of the time. But if Citygate was a reasonable option anyway, there's just slightly more incentive to get you there. Um, and, it's a role player sometimes, and it's not that crazy of an opening anyway. But that'll do it for the main topic. Let's now move to the kingdom for next time, which is Overlord, Tracker, Vagrant, Fishing Village, Market Square, Herald, Jack of all trades, Bazaar, Mountebank, Border Village, with the event Windfall and the project, of course, Citygate. Once more for our audio-only listeners, we've got Overlord, Tracker, Vagrant, Fishing Village, Market Square, Herald, Jack of all trades, Bazaar, Mountebank, and Border Village. So my thoughts on this kingdom, yeah, it's a bit tricky. It's really hard to draw here because the only trashing is Jack and I guess the trash boon every rarely that you get with Tracker. You could also obviously play Jack off of Overlord, but yeah, basically your Herald is the draw. Jack can kind of draw, sort of, but not so much. There's not much thinning. Basically, Windfall is a pipe dream. You're probably never getting there. I guess maybe if you have a stack of like 10 Heralds, you're not getting junked by Mountebank much. And I don't know, like maybe you can get there, but it seems quite unlikely that you do. So Windfall is basically pipe dream. Mountebank is got to be really good because there's no way to get rid of the coppers, right? Other than, again, the one boon, which you're going to get once every 12 flips, right? Which you shouldn't count on. So that's something. Overlord is the big question mark for me here, right? If Overlord weren't on this board, I definitely would want to open with Citygate and probably Jack and get fishing villages and Jacks and Mountebanks. But one thing that Citygate can do against Mountebank is you can float a curse, right? Once you have a curse, you can put the curse on top, and so you'll have it the next turn, and then eventually you're going to use it to block your opponent's Mountebank coming in. So that's something nice that Citygate could do for you here. But I think I wouldn't want to play with Herald. I probably still don't want to play with Herald. But would just want to play with Fishing Villages, Jacks, and Mountebanks. And I think I still want to do that, and with Citygate as well. Maybe you can go for Market Square at some point. Maybe? I don't know. But I'm not sure whether you want to open Overlord or not. And if you have 3-4 or 4-3, if you want to get something into Overlord or just open Overlord, or maybe just skip Overlord altogether and go on this Citygate, Jack, Fishing Village, Mountebank plan anyway, which seems kind of good to me. The big draw of getting Overlord on turn 1 or 2 is that you get to thing. Why is my brain not functioning? The big draw of getting Overlord on turns 1 or 2 is that you got to start playing Mountebanks as early as turn 3 and 4. But I'm not sure how much better that is than playing Jacks. And I kind of want to get Citygates and Jacks and the Mountebank. So turn 1, I think I might Citygate. I don't know. On 5-2, I'd probably go Mountebank Overlord. On 2-5, I almost certainly just open Overlord and pay the debt. But on 3-4 and 4-3, I'm less sure. But I think I still want to play something around Jack of all trades, Fishing Village, Mountebank, with a Citygate to hopefully try to block a decent number of my opponent's Mountebanks coming in. Basically, I'm always going to prefer Fishing Village to Jack of all trade, or not to Jack of all trades, to silver, right? I'm going to gain some silvers from Jack of all trades, and that's going to be fine. but I'm gonna buy fishing villages almost the whole time over silver. Um, I'm gonna get. I don't know how many mountebanks is the big thing. I don't know how many mountebanks I want to buy. How important it is to get them or to get a lot of them. I think it maybe depends on how many fishing villages and jacks I have. Do I want two mountebanks more than I want two jacks? I don't know. I'm probably just buying like pretty much all actions. I guess you could get a gold at some point, but pretty much all actions and then green cards. And I think that's how the game is going to play out. I probably wouldn't get Market Square. I think that seems a little bit too cute. And I don't think that the plus buy is going to be that good or important. I'm generally pretty low on tracker, and I don't think I'd get it here, but it's also a consideration, I guess. And yeah, I don't think the Heralds are going to work out super well, so I don't think I'd touch them. But I don't think they're going to work out super well because you're just going to have too many non-actions coming in from Mountebank and or Jack. So that's my thoughts on this board, but let me know what you guys think. You can reach out to us. You can find us on this YouTube channel, which is Adam Horton 01, I think. Let me look that up. I should know what Adam. Yes, Adam Horton 01. That's youtube.com/Adam Horton 01. You could check out my YouTube page, which is youtube.com/Wandering Winder. I'll be uploading. I haven't uploaded for a while, but I've got a big list of videos that I'm going to be uploading. Mostly Dominion, some Slay the Spire, a little bit of Magic, that are going to be coming up shortly. That they'll be releasing over time, so you can check out my stuff there. You can reach out to us at the forums, adamhorton.com. You can reach out to us on the Making Luck Discord page. You can email us. You can send up a smoke signal, send a carrier pigeon, put it on a post-it note. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, hope you enjoyed. Let me know if you have feedback. Like I said, the feedback from last time from Bobby DJ18 was really good feedback. We've been getting some really good feedback. Love that stuff. We will try to address as best we can all the feedback we get. So, yeah. Hope you have a good day, week, month, however long it is between now and when you hear my sultry? Do guys have sultry tones? Dulcet? Whatever, when you hear my voice again. Anyway, this is Wandering Winder signing off, and so Slay the Spire, right? Pretty good game. I recommend checking it out. I hope they deploy what's in the beta branch now more broadly soon, but you can get it on Steam, you can get it on Switch, you can get it on other platforms, I think. Pretty fun game. I think we might do a 0.5 episode on it at some point. This is not really what I was going for because I'm trying to going for the like funny sign-off bit, and this is just too straightforward. Have you tried winning?